now that we have a strong understanding of Madison's conception of self-interest and the contrasting cost-benefit conception of self-interest, we can talk about 4 propositions about political participation. Propositions are testable ideas that come out of a particular theoretical perspective. These propositions, again, are testable, and that's why we want to state them clearly so that we know when we see the evidence whether the evidence is supportive or not supportive of the proposition. The first proposition is this: as the cost of participation increases, the rate of participation decreases. So on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we have the rate of participation. Is it high? Is it low? Is it somewhere in between? On the horizontal or x-axis, we have the cost of participation, from low-cost participation all the way up to high-cost participation. The line that bends from left to right suggests that as the cost of participation increases, the rate of participation decreases. So let's consider, for example, a low-cost form of political participation, registering to vote. It's relatively simple. In this day and age, you can get on the internet and register to vote online in the state of California. It takes a few minutes, that's part of the cost, and you have to have the knowledge to do it. But other than that, it's a pretty low-cost form of participation, so we expect that a lot of people will do it. It's not asking a lot in terms of opportunity costs. Voting is slightly more costly. More costly because you need to, in a world without COVID, you need to travel to your polling place, so you need to know where it is first. You might have to walk or drive, and that could take you some time. Once you get there, you might have to stand in line, and then you're going to spend some time marking off your ballot. If you are voting by mail, as we all will during this election, if you're voting by mail, you're going to have to sit down with your ballot, spend some time reading through it as you would if you were in the polling place, and then making your choices. Your choices presumably have some informational basis, so you've made some investment there. Again, voting is more costly than simply registering to vote. It takes more time and effort and information, but we still expect that a fairly high percentage of people will involve themselves in voting. But let's take something that's maybe a little bit more high cost, like joining an interest group. You might have to spend money out of your pocket, or spend time working with the interest group on this thing that you happen to be interested in. Time, money, effort. Being part of an interest group asks more of the participant. And so from the cost-benefit perspective, getting involved in a group is going to be something that fewer people are going to do because it presents them with a higher cost. Now, go out to the far end of the x-axis, where the costs are very high, like running for office. If you're running for office, you are going to need to have a lot of time that you're going to put into that particular thing. You might have to raise money to help run your campaign, so you're going to spend time calling or meeting with people and begging them for money. If it's a high office like Congress or the president, this is probably going to be your full-time job. So the cost may also include not having a regular income until and unless you win the election. At at that end of the cost curve, what we're going to see is very few people are going to choose to engage in that form of participation. Now, from Madison's perspective, Madison says, well, hey, we're goal-oriented. We are political animals. We are going to be involved in all politics all the time. Whether it's registering to vote, voting, certainly joining an interest group or what he would call a faction, we're going to be doing all of those things. And maybe fewer people will choose to run for office, but we expect to see high levels of political participation across all different forms of participation. So now we have two competing ideas, and in the next presentation, we're going to test this proposition along with the others that I'm introducing here. But now we have two clear ideas about how we think self-interest influences people's political participation. Proposition number 2 says that rates of participation can be manipulated through public policy. That is, by changing the rules of political participation, we can increase the cost, resulting in lower levels of participation, or we can decrease the costs, resulting in more participation. So if, for instance, we make registering to vote less costly in terms of time and effort, more people are going to do it. Remember, I said that you could go online to register to vote in California. That lowers the costs compared to what I had to do when I registered to vote at the age of 18. When I was 18, to register to vote in the city of Seattle, you had to travel to one of the branches of the Seattle Public Library. You can only imagine, as an 18-year-old, I'm probably not spending a lot of time at the library. So this is a special trip that I'm going to have to make to go inside and fill out my voter registration information. It's a separate trip to a place that I am not normally going to in order to achieve this goal. Well, we could make it easier, say, by putting it on the internet and making it possible for somebody to sit on their butt at home, take 5 minutes, and register to vote. You know, you've reduced the opportunity costs a lot by moving voter registration online in the places where it has been put online. So what we can see here is that when we change the rules of the game, according to cost-benefit logic, we can change who's participating and who's not participating. Proposition number 3 suggests that those with more political resources can bear the costs of participation and will participate more. So each one of us has a pool of political resources: education, money, time, energy, effort, all of those things that we talked about when we talked about cost-benefit self-interest. Some people have high levels of resources. Others have low levels of resources. When somebody has high levels of resources, like time and money, they're going to be able to participate in many different forms of participation. So take somebody like Bill Gates. Bill Gates has a lot of money, so I'm almost certain that he votes. But Bill Gates can do other things, like form interest groups all of his own in order to push forward on the things that he's really interested in. And that's what the Gates Foundation is all about. It's about pushing forward his interests in things like global health and education. He can participate in a way that I can't, that most of us can't, because we have fewer political resources. Think about voting. If it were the case that voting was, that in order to vote, you needed to take an hour away from your job and that hour away from your job would be unpaid. So the cost of voting becomes very real. It becomes money out of your pocket. Well, at that point, because you may not be able to bear those costs of participation, you might be less likely to participate. Someone like me, hey, I'm in a salaried position. I get paid no matter what hours of the day or night I happen to be working. For me, I have to get the job done, period. So if I leave work for an hour to go cast my vote, well, that's an easy thing to do. I have the resources to be able to do that. Not everyone has all of those resources. Proposition number 4 is where the rubber really hits the road with these ideas. Proposition 4 suggests that as the cost of participation increases, the resource bias increases. Now we're going to need to take a second to understand what the resource bias is. The resource bias is the difference between those who are eligible to participate and those who actually participate. The difference between those who are eligible to participate and those who actually participate. Let's look at this schematic. So here's a situation in which there is no resource bias. On the left, that's all potential voters. This is the population of voters who are eligible to participate. For the most part, if you're a U.S. citizen over the age of 18, you are available to participate. Now, let's say that Americans are split into 2 groups, a high social status group and a low social status group. On the whole high social status side, we have people who make more money, who have more education, who have jobs that are held in high esteem. And on the low social status side, we have people who are more of a mixture. Now, compare that to the people who actually vote. And again, this is simply a drawing to help us understand. When we look at all actual voters, number one, we're going to see that there are fewer actual voters than there are potential voters because we never have 100% voter turnout. But that population of people who actually vote is representative of those who could vote. See the line going down the middle? The relative proportions of high social status to low social status individuals is the same. Now, let's look at a situation where there is a resource bias, a systematic bias. On the left side, we have our example of all potential voters, where it's split in half, like before. But then, as we look over on the right, yes, the population of actual voters is smaller, but it is actually skewed, systematically overrepresenting one group of voters, that is, high social status voters. Why those voters? Because they have the resources to bear the costs of participation. Low social status individuals don't have those same resources, and so they may not participate at the same rate that we would expect if the electorate was to be fully representative. Now, returning to our graphic of proposition number 4, as the cost of participation increases, the resource bias increases. So down at the low end of the cost of participation on the horizontal axis, down at the low end, we'll find forms of participation like registering to vote and voting. There will be a bias. High social status individuals will, because they can bear the cost of participation, they will participate at higher levels. But as we move up that axis, as the cost of participation increases, as we begin to talk about who joins interest groups, who gives money to political candidates, who runs for office. As the cost goes up, the cost-benefit theory suggests that that bias will be greater and greater. That is, that people with resources will be overrepresented as the cost of participation increases. Madison didn't take into account how costs might influence participation. He expects high levels of participation that are representative of the public, regardless of the cost of participation. What we've done now is we have set up 4 propositions, each with expectations about what we should observe in the real world, and we can turn to empirical evidence to test these propositions to see which one of these conceptions of self-interest gives us a better prediction about who it is that is going to be participating and who's not going to be participating. And that's what we'll move on to in the next presentation.